Welcome to the first State of the Fairfax County Police Department with Police Chief Kevin Davis. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and in this program we're going to look forward to sharing with you the changes that have been made since Chief Davis's appointment last year, the challenges the department still faces, some updates on their recent community engagement efforts, and his vision for the future. He has a long list of credentials and accomplishments and jobs, and I'm only going to highlight a few. Chief Davis was born and raised in College Park, Maryland, and is a fourth-generation public safety servant. He's the 11th police chief for the Fairfax County Police Department, which is Virginia's largest police agency and the 32nd largest in the nation. He celebrated his one-year anniversary with the Fairfax County Police Department this May. Previously, he led the nation's 8th largest police department in Baltimore, Maryland, for 3 years. During that time, he negotiated a federal court-ordered consent decree with the Department of Justice. Chief Davis has substantial crisis leadership experience, including in the area of mental health. He has a master's degree in management from Johns Hopkins University. He is a graduate of the FBI National Academy and the FBI National Executive Institute. He has served on numerous professional and community boards. He's an adjunct professor at American University and lecturer at the Catholic University of America. Chief Davis is married with 4 children. Welcome, Chief Davis.
Thank you for having me, Catherine.
So it's been 1 year since you became the police chief of Fairfax County. Congratulations, by the way. And you came in with a 90-day plan. What was your top priority in that 90-day plan, and what was your biggest challenge?
Well, I've said, Catherine, many times that I feel like I joined an all-star team when I came to Fairfax County. And by team, I'm talking beyond the police department. This is a well-oiled, functional government. The community is wonderful. It's inquisitive. It applies scrutiny where it needs to be applied to the government and to public safety, and scrutiny makes us better. The challenges have been many, but we've overcome a lot in a year. I think my biggest challenge initially was with morale, and morale is a real thing. Even though you can't see it, touch it, and feel it, morale is real. And what police officers want, Catherine, is not anything different than what the community wants. They want to be treated fairly and with due process. So my biggest challenge when I got here was communicating to the rank and file that I am a due process police chief, externally in the community and internally. Procedural justice is meaningful to me, and I apply that within the organization as well as to the community that we serve.
And I think you really hit on something with the issue of morale, that people want accountability, you know, and when you set expectations and people understand and everyone is held to that same standard, that does make people feel like they are seen, they are heard, and you're going to take care.
Right. Absolutely. Well, one of the biggest challenges I had internally when I got here is there was a notion amongst the rank and file that commanders and supervisors were not held as accountable to our policies and our rules and our regulations as they were. So I started publishing, and still do, a quarterly disposition document that I share within the organization that lays out by rank who has been held accountable for what. And that's gone a long way. And you know, again, police officers are no different than any other folks that occupy any other profession. They want to be treated fairly. They want expectations to be high, and I certainly do have high expectations. And they want to know that there's a game plan and a strategy.
So in addressing the issue of morale, I think it touches on another one of retention of your best officers and recruitment of new officers. Talk a little bit about what you've done to address that.
Well, Catherine, there's a couple things going on at once here that are not mutually exclusive. Back in the mid-1990s, you'll recall, during the Clinton administration, there was a big national push to hire 100,000 extra police officers in America. And that happened under the COPS office that's underneath the Department of Justice. And Fairfax County benefited from that. So we have a lot of police officers in Fairfax County that were hired in the mid-90s. And now here we are in 2022. And now they're eligible to retire. They have 25, 26, 27 years of experience, and they're eligible to retire, and they're taking advantage of that opportunity. So that's happening. And at the same time, we typically average about 4,200 police applicants a year. Last year we had 1,500 applicants. So our applicant pool has dropped. That's not unique to Fairfax. That's not unique to the Washington metropolitan area. That's going on across the country. So while we have senior folks who are leaving because they're retirement eligible. We're having fewer and fewer younger people who are interested in policing. And I'd probably need another hour to describe to you why I think that is.
Well, we're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about that. We are.
Yeah.
But one of the things, the community's been vocal about their involvement in policy reviews and updates, especially those, involving use of force and body-worn cameras. And I know there have been some policy changes that are all very important. And what are some of those policies, and why was it necessary to change them?
So as I pivot to talk about the use of force policies in particular, because I think that's really important internally and externally, I'll just say this. Our vacancy rate is about 150 police officers. So that's higher than it ever has been, and we're working really, really hard to attract people, not only to policing, but to our police department. Now, when it comes to expectations of police officers and community expectations, we, about 2 years ago, before I got here, the University of Texas at San Antonio was brought into the Fairfax County Police Department. The Board of Supervisors, the Chairman McKay, County Executive Brian Hill, said, let's bring the University of Texas to San Antonio into the, put their nose under the tent, see what's going on with use of force. And from that, they made 50 some odd recommendations, I think 58 recommendations. We have implemented already 80% of those recommendations as it pertains to use of force. And some of the things that we've implemented are things that I think folks who watch this show are familiar with, banning chokeholds for one, requiring police officers to intervene when they see misconduct occur in front of them, regardless of rank, regardless of seniority. You have to intervene. I think our country, our profession has learned a lot of lessons after the murder of George Floyd. There were police officers present while that was taking place. You have to intervene. So we actually brought to Fairfax County a gold standard intervention training called ABLE, Active Bystandership for Law Enforcement. It's run out of Georgetown University, and it teaches police officers how to intervene when they see their peers doing something that they shouldn't do. And there's other things with use of force, not necessarily directly related to use of force, but our vehicle pursuit policy, we greatly changed that. We're in a suburban jurisdiction, kinda, but we're also in an urban suburban jurisdiction. I mean, we're a suburban county of about 409 square miles with pockets of urban living, and we're getting bigger and bigger and more congested, and that's not a surprise to anyone watching this show. So when we engage in the very dangerous and important effort of pursuing someone with a police car, we have greatly limited the number of instances when we allow police officers to engage in a vehicle pursuit. So that keeps people safer. And then we have body-worn cameras. If you're anywhere in operations on the Fairfax County Police Department, patrol, an operational detective, SWAT, K-9, you have a body-worn camera attached to you at all times. And that's really, really gone a long way to build community trust.
Well, I think, law enforcement continues to evolve and change. So body-worn cameras they're fairly recent, I think, and as far as putting aside budgetary resources for body-worn cameras for all officers is something that, communities struggled with, I think, until George Floyd. And then it became an issue of this is something like standard issue equipment because of accountability, which touches back to your whole idea of morale and accountability and letting people know what the standard is. And something else is training. So you talked a little bit about the sort of what I've heard is the standard from that San Antonio Police Department about crisis intervention training, de-escalation practices and policies. I've spoken with Sheriff Stacy Kincaid about this like years ago when she was interested in that as well. Like how do we figure out what is a law enforcement issue and what is a crisis issue, and how do you train your officers? So talk a little bit about how you are training your officers. So
I really think body-worn cameras were introduced much more rapidly to our profession after Michael Brown. Back in 2014.
Yes.
And then I was a police commissioner in Baltimore after the in-custody death of Freddie Gray. And I mean, unfortunately, the list goes on and on. Eric Garner in New York. There are so many situations that the community has said to our profession, we want you to wear body cameras. Our police officers, and this is something that I never thought I would see years ago, police officers want body cameras. They want people to see what they do, the challenges that they're up against, the difficult circumstances that they face on a daily basis. So it's one of those things where the community and the cops both feel the same way about body cameras. We can't do enough to ensure that every police officer in America, and we're very fortunate in Fairfax County to have the support of the Board of Supervisors and the chairman to have that. It's a huge expenditure, huge, but it's necessary. And we can't make a U-turn. There are no U-turns allowed. As far as gold standard use of force training, and it's a mouthful, it's ICAT, I-C-A-T, Integrating Communications, Assessments, and Tactics. The Police Executive Research Forum, it's one of America's policing think tanks out of Washington, D.C., traveled to Scotland in 2015. So this is after Michael Brown, right after Freddie Gray in Baltimore, and a group of police executives went to the UK to study how their officers use force differently overseas. And they came back with amazing recommendations that ended up being the genesis for ICAT use of force training. And it's, the way I describe it to folks, it's de-escalation and diffusion on steroids. And I think when people hear de-escalation and diffusion, they're thinking of verbal judo. I'm going to try to calm you down by my words, by my tone. I'm going to try to get you to come out of a crisis. But it's more than that. It's using time and distance to our advantage. And as a person who's been in this profession for over 30 years now, I was trained as a young police officer to get there quick, handle the incident, and be ready to move on to the next one. We have to slow our police officers down. It's okay to wait for your backup. It's okay to wait for your backup and whatever else you need before you enter that scenario where U-turns are hard to make. And then the ICAT training really teaches and coaches police officers how to use distance to their advantage as well. We had a police-involved, a non-fatal police-involved shooting a few months ago, and the man was armed with a crossbow and arrow. And our police officers initially were inside the home with this man who was experiencing a mental health crisis. And our police officers backed out of the house. They left the house. That probably never would have occurred back in the early part of the 21st century, certainly not in the 1980s or 1990s when we were trained as police officers not to give up ground. So it's okay to back up. It's okay to use distance to your advantage and to negotiate and to communicate. And there's example after example in Fairfax County of police officers using time and distance to their advantage to get someone to a better place so they're not a danger to themselves or a danger to others. So ABLE training is ongoing in Fairfax. ICAT training is ongoing. And then for the last nearly 2 years now, we're training all of our professional staff and sworn personnel on procedural justice and implicit bias training. So all those three buckets of training, implicit bias, procedural justice, ICAT, which is the gold standard use of force, and ABLE, which is the gold standard peer intervention, that's all going on at once in the Fairfax County Police Department.
Wow, that is amazing. So you've done some restructuring in the department. Why do you feel that that was necessary? And what were some of the changes in that restructuring?
Well, we've moved some folks around a little bit. We've centralized some units. We've decentralized some other units. We're just trying to be efficient. I want the chain of command to kind of make sense. So if you're a detective on the Fairfax County Police Department, whether you're a homicide detective, a child abuse detective, a robbery detective, or a crash detective, you're under the same chain of command, and it ensures more consistent training, more consistent expectations. So just things like that, just to make sure things make sense. And that happens in policing from time to time. It's good to not stand still. And sometimes, change is good. I think, I was going to say police, but really we Americans don't react well to change when change is first introduced. But if change is introduced in a thoughtful way, I think people, with a whole lot of communications, you can't communicate enough. I think change is ultimately embraced as something positive. We've also added a full-time command presence as a community outreach position under me in the chief's office. all of our community outreach efforts have historically been decentralized to the 8 district stations, and they still are. Every district station has its own community policing capacity, its own community outreach officers, its own crime prevention officers, and those officers, for a number of years now, have worked seamlessly with communities of trust. And that should be something that's known to Fairfax County residents, led for a number of years by Shirley Ginwright, who is now working with the police department. And she's helping us do bigger and better things with community outreach from a headquarters perspective. And she's helping us do bigger and better things with local recruiting and better retention efforts. And again, our diversity, and we can get to that, I'm sure that's a question coming up. Our diversity strides in the last calendar year or year plus have been really, really encouraging.
Well, you know, you point out something that's so important, which is nothing stands still. Not in business, not in education, not in anything. Nothing stands still, and yet you're right. I don't think people change unless they absolutely have to. We're all comfortable, and when you have to learn new things, the biggest thing is the learning curve itself. But you talk about implicit bias, which is, again, something that was not always used in any workplace setting or law enforcement. But the fact that we have a vocabulary to talk about things like that are really important, like de-escalation and crisis intervention. You know, we develop vocabularies to talk about things, and one of those things is working with people who are on the spectrum. And I know that a lot of effort has been made, because when law enforcement encounters somebody, it's not necessarily evident if someone has a cognitive processing disorder, and that's caused problems in the past. And yet, I think now, in every setting, from education to workplace to law enforcement, we have a vocabulary to talk about how this is a different thing we need to understand.
Right. And that vocabulary, Catherine, is relatively new, to include diversity, equity, and inclusion. You know, we have had, for the last couple of years, a rotation of commanders, captains and majors in particular, on the Fairfax County Police Department that have served as our diversity officer. And they've worked under the umbrella of Carla Bruce, who's the county's diversity officer. But we're now in the process of hiring a full-time civilian diversity officer, someone who has the credentials and the experience, someone who's going to be in that position for a number of years, who doesn't get promoted out of it or laterally transferred out of it or retires. So that commitment didn't exist in the past, not just here, but anywhere, really. So we do have new language, new words. They help us talk about things. Crisis intervention training. We have a co-responder model. Again, that's new to policing, a co-responder. If someone mentioned that to me back in the early 90s, I wouldn't know what they were talking about. But we have police officers and mental health professionals. We're in phase 1 of our co-responder program, that they respond to calls for service where it's clear that someone's experiencing a mental health crisis or a behavioral crisis. And as we get into different phases in our co-responder plan and strategy, there will be several officers at any given time across the county with mental health professionals in the same car responding to these calls for service. Our mental health and behavioral crisis calls for service have increased dramatically over the last couple calendar years, and that's consistent with what we're seeing regionally and nationally. And the state of Virginia recommends that about 20% of any Virginia police department be trained in crisis intervention, and it's a robust training. It's at least a week. It's specialty training. 42% of our department, so we're twice the recommended average, and we should be. And we're Virginia's largest, most sophisticated police department. I'm biased, I admit it, and we are proud to lead the way with co-responder training. We're proud to lead the way with implicit bias procedural justice training, ICAT, ABLE, you name it. We're early adopters in Fairfax County. We want to be first, and we want to try things. And you know, if they don't work out, we'll make an adjustment. But we don't want to, like you said, Catherine, we don't want to stand still.
No, and I think, you know, we need to talk about the geography and the population of Fairfax County too. Within the county, the eastern part of the county, the Route 1 corridor, very different from Centerville and Herndon. You know, in the middle of the county and down at Lord, I mean, it's almost like in another place they would be different locations, and they're not. They're all within the county. And so there are these small communities, you know, that identify via neighborhoods or the languages they speak, or new Americans who come here, or immigrants who come here who settle in communities with people who speak their language and share their traditions. And it seems to me that's a huge challenge for law enforcement, is not only to represent those communities, and we will talk about how your efforts to get people to represent the communities, but just understanding how they see interactions with law enforcement based on what they're bringing.
Absolutely.
The county's huge and so diverse.
It's huge, it's diverse. It's always the case with local government and police departments in particular. The diversity of a jurisdiction tends to change more rapidly than the ability of government to diversify its own workforce to keep up with it. And that's a challenge. So the diversity of Fairfax County has outpaced the diversity over time of the Fairfax County Police Department. So we have to make intentional efforts. We have to make intentional recruiting and hiring and promotional efforts. And my last group of command promotions was about 45% minority, both gender and racial minority. We were engaged in this national campaign called 30 by 30. Mm-hmm. It's a campaign. It's a pledge that police chiefs across the country are taking, not all, but many, to work toward having 30% of our sworn recruit classes be female by the year 2030. Well, the last academy class we graduated, Catherine, was 36% female. So, and over the last year, we've been at about 27% female. And our black and brown officers, our academy classes have been populated at twice the incumbent percentage. So that takes work. You just can't sit back and wish for that to happen. Intentional recruiting efforts. And again, and I know I mentioned her name earlier, we brought in Shirley Ginwright to help us move the needle. And sometimes progress is slow, but as long as it's steady, we'll eventually get there. It's like, Woody Hayes, the old Ohio State football coach, 3 yards in a cloud of dust. Let's make steady progress. The relentless pursuit of progress.
And it is an arc. So in your efforts to recruit, especially young people, it seems to me, let's go all the way down to the middle school level, because I think there's been attempts made to introduce the idea that we should put before middle school students the career opportunities that they may not ever have considered before. Because again, if you're an engineer, you have to take certain high-level maths, or you'll never have the maths necessary to get into an engineering program, just as an example. So when you think about law enforcement, if people don't come from a tradition of law enforcement, you're fourth generation law enforcement. Right. You think about law enforcement, even when you see law enforcement on the news, it tends to be very generational. And people chose that because they were familiar with that. Like that's something that an uncle did or their dad did, or they're familiar with it. With diverse populations, how do you start that arc with young people understanding that law enforcement can be a wonderful career for them? Yeah. And I know you've got your cadet program, and I want to talk about the cadet program too, but just shifting the narrative about who is in law enforcement.
Yeah. We have cadets, 10 of them. We have public safety cadets, about 60 or so. We have VIPs, the citizens who can volunteer to serve with us. We have auxiliary police officers. We really have a lot, but what we need to do more of is the pipeline. Because you said it, I'm fourth generation. So it didn't take a whole lot of cajoling for me to consider policing as a profession. It's kind of been part of my DNA. And policing and firefighting, they're legacy professions. They're white male populated generation after generation, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Nope.
But how do we attract others so we can have different perspectives? So that's been the challenge. And I think it's good to have this conversation of a vocation introduced to middle schools and high schools. It is not dulling expectations to talk to young people about a career in public safety. And I think sometimes that's a little bit of a conversation we have to have with folks. We need to talk to our young people about considering public service as a vocation. And then we can get more specific because public service can mean any number of different things. But we have to continue to be more intentional, focused. Our budgets have to reflect our commitments. Sometimes our commitments come out of our mouths, and budget enhancements and budget priorities don't reflect what we say we want to do. So we got to put our money where our mouth is, and not just the police department, but the government. So if we want more young people from Fairfax County, young people of color with racial and gender diversity to consider Fairfax County, what are we doing to stand up vocational opportunities, educational opportunities? The District of Columbia, Mayor Bowser and Chief Conti have made a big commitment. We're looking at what they're doing, and we're going to mimic the best of what they're doing here in Fairfax County.
So what about, we have an academy system here in Fairfax County Public Schools. So kids can sign up to be part of an academy, and they are also evolving over time. Like new programs are added. And is this something that, law enforcement or first responders are looking at doing in Fairfax County? Is can we have an academy so that there is a place where people are like, I think I want to do this as a career. Can I go here?
That would certainly be ideal, Catherine. And it's not a pipe dream. It can happen. There has to be community and political will, and then the police department has to simply make it happen. And we're prepared to again, be an early adopter. We're prepared to try something. We're prepared to be innovative. But that's where we need to be. So when a 13, 14, well, let's say mid-teens, 15, 16, 17-year-old wants to consider policing as a profession, we've got a way to keep that young person on the hook. Because unlike the fire department, my sisters and brothers in the fire department, yes, God bless them, they can become a sworn, full-time, paid at the age of 18. Right. For the police department, you have to be 21. So we actually lose a lot of people between the tender ages of 18 and 21. So, how do we keep them on the hook? How do we keep them interested? And it has to involve, compensation opportunities, right, educational opportunities. We just can't say do it because it's the right thing to do. It's just
I think that's one of the incredible things about your cadet program, because internships in the main have been a huge divider between students who have access to internships and can afford to work for free, yeah, and people who do not have access to professional internships and who can't afford to work for free. And there is a tremendous movement afoot to make sure that there's a fair way of providing internships to not just the sons and daughters of the people.
Absolutely, yeah.
And to make sure that people who don't have access to that, and to pay them. And so that's been a movement, yeah, on Capitol Hill, yeah, to pay the interns so that there's greater representation on Capitol, yeah, Hill. And I think in law enforcement that goes, yeah, a long way too. It's kind
of...
Pay
them and help them out with their transportation and their housing.
Absolutely.
There are a lot of governments now that are including residency stipends for their police officers. So that's another innovative way to assist police officers. Because listen, not just Fairfax, but Northern Virginia, D.C., it's not inexpensive to live here.
I know.
So we have 75% of our police department lives outside the boundaries of Fairfax County. So only 25% lives here. So and the main reasons, or the main reason rather, is the cost of living.
Yep.
So do we just accept that, or do we try to do something about it? And I'm convinced that elected officials and community leaders and others really want to try to move the needle with that. And again, I'll just mention the District of Columbia. They have a $6,000 residency stipend that's in place right now in D.C., and we're looking at that. How can we take the best of that and try to make it happen here in a place like Fairfax County? We, the Fairfax County Police Department, convinced the state of the Commonwealth of Virginia to reduce the number of years police officers outside of Virginia have to serve in their home state before they can be considered eligible to be hired as a police officer in Virginia. It was 5 years, now it's down to 3. So it's just thinking a little bit differently.
Those things are important, and that's true for nurses, that's true for teachers, even attorneys. When they wave into another, yep, bar from wherever they got their initial law license, we have to think differently. Absolutely. Because there is a shortage of people to do the work, the critical, yep, work that needs to be done. Yep. But I give you all props for thinking innovatively, yep, and being willing to try.
We have a new software technology that will cut our application process in half. It has traditionally taken 9 months to a year to get hired as a Fairfax County police officer. And the typical Fairfax County police officer applicant applies to 4 or 5 other different agencies. And two factors determine where that applicant goes. The speed at which she or he is brought through the process and eventually offered a job, and then the manner in which they're treated along the way. So if we can cut that time in half and ensure that when we interact with a police applicant, it's a mentorship applicant, and you're not just a number, I think that's another huge factor in how we can attract people. Because remember what I said earlier, we were at over 4,000 applicants a year. We were down to 1,500 last year. And that's with much more recruiting efforts happening, much more personnel assigned to it. It's just a different ball game right now, and we've got to change the way we play and practice.
Well, I agree with you, and I appreciate the fact that you're willing to come and explain to the people what you're doing, because you don't know what you don't know until someone tells you.
Right,
so
right.
This is really important.
Right.
And I think we have covered a lot within the limited amount of time we have, but can you tell us what your priorities are for the upcoming year?
Sure.
And how the community can get more involved?
Well, we haven't talked about crime very much, and I want to just touch on that. So
Sure.
Fairfax County remains the safest, largest jurisdiction of its type in the country, and we're very, very proud of that. That doesn't mean we don't have crime challenges. So we've got 3 challenges I want to talk about very, very briefly, and 3 things that we're doing about them. Stolen cars. Stolen cars are up in Fairfax County.
Yes, where I live too, in my own neighborhood.
Yeah, they're up. And again, I'm going to say this, and I'm not saying this to blame or to shame any victim who has his or her car stolen, but about 80% of our cars are stolen with the keys or the key fob inside the car. So please don't do that.
Yeah,
please don't do that. But we have stood up a full-time auto crimes enforcement squad. That's all they do. It's half a dozen detectives and a supervisor. All they do all day, all night is focus on car theft trends, patterns, and known offenders. And they've already made tremendous strides. The second crime challenge in Fairfax County, again, all these are regional challenges too. So they don't just happen here in a vacuum, is the theft of catalytic converters. Catalytic converters have precious metals that are going for, the value has skyrocketed. So we have a catalytic converter task force. I never thought I'd say that in my career.
It's kind of crazy. I never thought
big.
my dealership would offer to engrave my VIN number on my catalytic converter.
So we've recently, with the help of other jurisdictions and federal partners, identified a couple crews coming out of North Carolina and one coming out of Maryland. We've done some proactive things, and we've greatly slowed down the rate of catalytic converter thefts, but they're still happening. And then the third thing, and we have, again, that task force is new, and it's in response to a challenge. So I think policing has challenges. The community should say to us, police, what are you doing about it? So the third challenge I want to briefly touch on are overdoses. Fatal overdoses, non-fatal overdoses, particularly the perks, the Adderalls, and the fentanyl that laces these drugs that are killing people. And from time to time, I'll still get a question: do people know that they're taking Adderall and perks laced with fentanyl?
No.
The answer is a lot of times yes.
Really?
It's that next level of high, and they're taking it right up to the brink. So we have we're the only ones, so I'm going to brag about us for a second. We're the only police department in the Washington metropolitan region that has an overdose squad. That's all they do is fatal and non-fatal overdoses. And just about a month ago, we worked with our partners at the DEA, and we took an arrest to the federal level, and the defendant who distributed drugs that resulted in a person's death was sentenced to 22 years for that death. So those are 3 kind of challenges that we're seeing, and 3 things that we're doing about
And
it.
I'm glad you brought that up, because sometimes things happen to such an extent that you almost become numb to them.
Right.
And the opioid epidemic was huge, and then it's been with us, and then it's been with us, and then it's been with us. And so the fentanyl overdoses, I'm surprised to hear you say that people do know, because I think early on in my Rotary Club, someone lost her brother to a fentanyl-laced narcotic, but it took out 6 other people the same night.
Yeah.
And she didn't believe that he knew that there was fentanyl in it. And then Narcan and getting people, trying to give a solution to people in the community, the amnesty for young people, so that when they have a friend in Christ, yes. And I'm like, so these are all things that we've had to do, but I do think that when something sits with you for a long time, like the opioid crisis, we can almost become numb to it, and we can't because it's still a crisis.
Well, Catherine, we have not seen this here in Fairfax, but regionally, along the Mid-Atlantic area, we see young people having what are called Narcan parties. So young people who are intentionally taking drugs, knowingly ingesting fentanyl, are gathering, typically at a house or an apartment, and they're bringing their own doses of Narcan so they can revive one another. So this is a serious problem.
Holy, you have 4 kids, is that what you said?
I have 4 kids.
I'm like, I
talk to them about it all the time.
I cannot even be, my kids are all in their 30s.
Yeah.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
I feel like, I got them
We
there.
made it.
but I, for anyone who has children, I would just be petrified all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, children, they're our greatest asset, and they're precious, and we can't talk enough to them about the things that matter. I know sometimes my kids want me to talk less.
Well,
but
don't they all?
At a local high school just a couple weeks ago, we had a fatal crash of a young man who was just indicted by a grand jury.
Yep.
And his speed at the time of his impact, an impact that took the lives of 2 freshmen in high school, was 81 miles an hour.
I heard that on WTOP today.
Yeah, that's too fast. That's way too fast.
And I think we all want a more walkable. We talk about bike lanes.
Yeah.
I go through bike lanes now, but there are no barriers there. If people don't pay attention to speed limits, if they don't pay attention to the markings, then people are going to get hurt. And I'd like to see a far more walkable urban environment in some of the areas of Fairfax County, but only if drivers understand.
We're so distracted, Catherine. We're so distracted.
I know.
And
vehicles are weapons.
It's
They're
tough.
huge.
It's tough to pick a fight against a 3,500-pound
car and win.
Yeah.
But that case, and right there at the end of the school year, it was devastating.
It was.
And avoidable.
And again, one more thing about us, the Fairfax County Police Department, we have a full-time traffic safety squad, a full-time DUI squad. So all those things matter. And we're big enough, and we're well resourced enough, in spite of our challenges that we're having right now, getting people in the door. And we're going to fix that. It's going to take a little bit, but we're going to fix it. But one of the benefits of being a big, educated, sophisticated, well-resourced police department is we can concentrate on everything. We don't have to pick and choose. And that's what, I make a point of telling people in Fairfax County all the time. You have a gold standard police department. There's not anything that other police departments in the country do that we don't also do. And I think sometimes people take comfort in that.
I think we also take it for granted. When you live in Fairfax County, you don't always look at how the transportation runs or how the services are delivered, or, when you call 911, how it all works that somebody shows up to rescue you. And so we do take it for granted, and we become very complacent and not asking ourselves, first of all, how can we support law enforcement? Like, if we want a better community, it can't just be on the other guy. All of us have to ask ourselves, what are we doing in our own communities to be part of that partnership? Yeah. If a partnership with law enforcement is something that we value, and that's really a goal.
Well, one thing that everyone can do, whether or not they spend a day in public safety, is talk to your loved ones, the younger ones in particular, about considering a career in public safety.
Yes.
And like you mentioned earlier, unless it's in your family, you think it exists. There's cops and there's firefighters, and the good that they do. But if you don't have anything that relates you to that, it's easy to think that that's a distant pipe dream and nothing you could accomplish. And in fact, we need you now more than ever.
That reminds me of something that pops into my head every once in a while about Take Your Daughter to Work Day, which started years ago. And it was like, take your daughter to work day so that she can understand what her career options are. Like, you went with mom and dad, and then it was take your child to work day. No, you should take your children, both of them, to work and show them what their opportunities are. And then I think it was President Obama who said, we need to take someone else's child to work because your children already know from what you do what is possible for them, but other people's children don't know.
Absolutely.
And so I listened to you talk about how you convince someone that law enforcement's a wonderful career. It's public service. It's giving back. It's creating the kind of community you want to live in and be a part of. And like, how do we do that if young people don't understand anything except what's on television or stereotypes of law enforcement.
Yeah.
How do we convince them that this is a great public service career?
Yeah, I like that. Take your neighbor's child to your
work.
work. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just thinking of my kids, and they're all in their 20s now. They know what I do, but my neighbor's kids might not. So that's a great point. I'm going to steal that.
Steal it, and I will help you with that too. So, in closing, thank you so much. I just want to thank Chief Davis for his leadership and candid responses in this very important conversation. I also want to thank you, our audience, for taking time out of your schedule to join us. A committed and involved community is an integral part of the future success of the Fairfax County Police Department. You are needed to help review policies and serve on committees and volunteer and teach children about careers in law enforcement. And again, learn more about how you can be involved by going to fairfaxcounty.gov/police/get-involved. We hope you will join us again for the Chat with the Chief quarterly series beginning in October. Thank you.